I'll openly admit I have, some PTSD over Clinical saying that it sounded wonky and then seeing the word wonky written all over the internet for 2 years and trying to figure out what exactly that meant and where it came from. And, after talking to a lot of our people, it was basically, that it has, a laid back 3 kilohertz to 5 kilohertz area.
Hey folks, welcome to this edition of Sound Decisions on Passion for Sound. You'll immediately realise that this looks very different from my normal videos, and that's because this is actually just a podcast episode. This is an interview that I did for the Passion for Sound podcast with Zach Murbach from ZMF Headphones or ZMF Headphones. And as well as putting it on the podcast, I decided to also post it here. It's very unedited, it's very raw, but I thought I'd share it here because there are just a few things that Zach will actually show us live on camera, and I thought you might want to see them. So enjoy the podcast. Remember, it is a podcast. It's not going to be edited to the normal standard on the channel, but I hope you enjoy it. And if you don't want to watch it here, I'll put a link down in the description below where you can jump through and just listen to the audio only. Thanks for watching or listening, and I'll see you next time on Passion for Sound. Zach, welcome to the Passion for Sound podcast. We might put this on YouTube as well. I haven't worked that out yet, but definitely it's going on the Passion for Sound podcast. So welcome to the Passion for Sound podcast. You are the first ever core guest, let's say. So normally it's a guy called Chris and I do the podcast. So you're the first ever interview, and thank you for breaking that ground for us.
Oh man, Chris, thanks for letting me be on here, Chris. Wherever you are, it's okay. I'll do my best for you.
And I didn't bother bringing Chris into this one. He actually runs a business distributing wholesaling gear here in Australia. And so I figured he'd be hard at work at this time of the day, whereas I could kind of sneak aside a few minutes. So it's just you and I with no Chris today for this one. So thanks, Zach.
Got a real job. Ugh.
Yeah, that's it. And I should introduce, because there might be some listeners to the podcast that haven't heard of you before, although hopefully they have, given that ZMF's ZMF's a fairly well-known brand now. But for those that haven't heard of ZMF, it's a headphone brand made in America. The brand started, and feel free to add to this in a moment, Zach, if I miss anything, but the brand started with you modifying headphones. I think the original one was you actually modified a pair of headphones for your brother or brother-in-law, is that right?
Yeah.
And then obviously grew from there into what it is now, which is a manufacturer very well regarded for your headphone designs, all using wooden cups, your own drivers, all bespoke gear now these days, isn't it?
Yeah. I mean, the quick, short story of it is I liked acoustic guitars, liked to build them, moved to the city, went to school, wanted to keep making things, fell in love with headphones through grad school. And I was like, man, it'd be cool to have a headphone that was like an acoustic guitar, a vintage acoustic guitar, and has some of those same aesthetics. And so just slowly from there became what we are today.
Okay, awesome. And if anyone wants to know the full kind of story and the how it all came about and everything, we've done, I think, 2 interviews now, which are episodes on the YouTube channel. The first one is mostly that kind of origin story, how you got to where you got to, what goes into your designing of headphones, etc. And then the second one was mostly focused on the Atrium headphone when that came out. And so today, we're not going to go into more of the backstory because that's already out there. What we're going to focus on today is the little bundle of goodies that you sent me recently, which was very exciting to receive. So what I've received from Zach recently was the ZMF Caldera, which is your top-of-the-range flagship kind of planar magnetic headphone. Also the Atrium closed you sent out to me. And then finally the Auteur Classic. And I don't leave that to the end because I think it's the least worthy. It's actually, I've been really, really impressed with the Auteur Classic. I liked the original Auteur. I think the Auteur Classic is phenomenal for its price and performance and whatnot. So
I also have the and I know some people may not be able to see me, but I also have the semi-portable-ish ZMF here that people keep asking about because I've been working about it on it for a long time.
Is this the one that you and I talked about?
This is what we plan on being our next headphone. Lesser, and the target price, originally in 2019 was $799, and now the target price is $999, given all that's happened since 2019. But this is the one I hope to release next, and we're in the late stages of it. So
all right, we'll follow that thread for a moment while you've got it. And for those that are listening to this on the podcast, it's a fairly slightly more compact size. It's a bit smaller in diameter than the normal ZMFs. Is that right?
Yeah, it's like, I mean, I describe it as kind of like a oval looking ZMF with kind of a more, I don't know, kind of neoclassical new age chassis design, similar chassis. I mean, it's an oval ZMF. And then when I say portable, it's about 400 grams. It's not a small headphone, but it's smaller than the gargantuan size of that we make. And it's the goal is to be lighter.
Okay.
It folds flat, it's something that you could, I think of it like your Woo WA8 or your Cord Hugo of headphones. You're not going to put it in your pocket, but, put it in your back.
Carry it around, take it to an office or travel with it or whatever. Yeah. So looking at it there, it looks like it's physically smaller than, say, an Atrium closed.
Yeah. So the Atrium closed here. I mean, here's the thing. It's actually probably a little taller than it. But it's slimmer. And so, the wood is actually a little thinner too.
Okay. So to make it lighter.
Yeah, a few little differences there. And I mean, the other thing that makes it more portable, so to speak, is just that it's going to have an 80 ohm impedance. It's easier to drive. It's a liquid crystal polymer driver, LCP driver. And, I tested a bunch of custom designs and just found that for that impedance, the lower impedance, this driver gets excited really quickly and sounds really great with the more portable type things. Like you could drive, this is like 105 dB per milliwatt. You can drive this off, I use a prototype of these through my laptop.
Right. Okay. Perfect. And tuning wise, Zach, what's it going to be similar to in terms of tuning?
It's probably honestly closer to the Atrium close than anything, which I know is a weird thing to say given that how few people have heard the Atrium close at this point. Just in that it's like, I would describe it as like Harman Smooth almost in a way with an extra mid bass kind of thing. Like it's got sub bass to it, but it's got a little extra musicality and warmth to the lower mids, and then just a touch below the Harman curve in those upper mid areas. And the one thing that LCP driver does really, really well is like a crisp, airy, that 10 to 20 kilohertz airy treble thing. Scintillating treble up and past where you can hear it kind of. And for whatever reason, that LCP driver just does that really. I think it's Sony or Audio-Technica has used LCP before, I want to say.
Yeah, but I'm not sure. I've seen it pop up in IEMs. I haven't seen it so much in headphones yet. So I'll be interested to hear a full-sized driver rather than a teeny tiny.
I'm getting close. We're going to get you one. We're going to get as many people one as we can. The production part's the toughest part with quantity, just because, $9.99 probably sell more of them than our more expensive stuff. So we're right in the middle of moving into a 8,000 square foot building right now that we've been working on for the last 2 years. And, the goal is to be able to not have people waiting for 2 months for a $999 headphone, which I could imagine would be annoying. I would be annoyed.
Yeah, that's it. At that price point, it is more of a quick purchase sort of thing, isn't it?
Yeah, I would think, I don't know. I think for whatever reason, the less money you spend as a consumer, the less fancy and more fast you want something. So I'm trying to split that difference between getting that full ZMF wood, metal, leather experience and, quickness, so to speak, so. Makes
sense. And one other question on it is is it using the Atrium damping system?
Yes, yeah, and I mean that's kind of the cool thing about the Atrium damping system is that it's kind of infinitely malleable. Just in that the whole idea of it is that it you can use a bunch of different materials. You can change the distance. The really like to break down Atrium damping system into a small box is basically as long as the damping material doesn't rest right up against the driver and it's not right up against the back of the cup, it's in that intermediate area. It's the idea of, having that and playing with the arc of there's any radius to the damping material to make the system work. And the whole influence of it was basically acoustic guitars and just my own listening in different spaces and realizing that, you would never damp a speaker in a room by putting, bass traps right up against the speaker or, you have to damp the walls, of course, but you also have to have the right things in the middle of the room. And the listener usually sits in the middle of the room. So the whole idea is to make the ear, the focal point. And that's why if you have to have like a little bit of a radius to your damping, or in closed backs, at least a focal point of where the airflow is going, and you want it to be the ear. Whereas most damping I'd seen in the past, and when I started out with T50 mods, you either just stuffed the cup with something or put something right on the driver, and that just creates a situation where you over damp or under damp something really easily.
Yeah.
Whereas this, there's infinite possibilities, but it allows me a little more of a system to work with.
Yeah, makes sense.
Which I think going forward, most of my designs will start with that. Not saying it will work for every design because every driver is different. But.
Yep. But the reason I asked that, and I'll do a little quick backtrack as to what Atrium damping is in a second for anyone that hasn't seen the previous videos or looked at the website, on your website that is. The reason I ask that is because for me, from the moment you've introduced the Atrium damping system, each headphone has been better than anything you've made before, in my opinion at least. I think it's really transformed. You already had a knack for tuning a great sounding headphone, but I feel like somehow the Atrium damping system's taken those and kind of, what's the word? It's like it's not enhanced. It's like it's catalyzed even better sound out of the same tunings or the same, obviously it's you doing the tuning, so it's a similar approach, but the end result is better in each occasion, I think, than what we've heard in the past, at least, as I said, for me. And so just for anyone that hasn't heard of the Atrium damping system before, the Atrium damping system it's patented or pending patent, I think. Zach, is it actually done yet?
Patent pending. So patent pending. So, it'll go under review at some point within the next year or so.
Okay. Yep. And it's a foam system that sits behind the driver of the headphone and is sculpted in such a way as to damp the headphone effectively. I won't try and explain it in any technicality here.
Yeah. And it doesn't have to be foam. It's any damping material that is anywhere from a 0 to 45-degree radius behind a driver that has to be within the space between the driver and the back of the cup. So,
okay.
Yeah. But I have mostly used foam so far, but it's not limited to that. We have tried a few other things.
Okay. Oh, cool.
Infinite possibility.
Excellent. And let's use that as a segue, because one of the things I wanted to talk to you about was the Caldera and the sound that the Caldera is producing. And there's a few factors to that. One of them obviously is the Atrium damping system is going to be helping how it sounds. But you were just talking about over damping, and it was something I was interested in when I tried the Mantle. So the Mantle, for those not familiar, is with the Caldera, you can get the Mantle as a front attaching, essentially damping system, I guess. And it just seems to tame some of the upper frequencies, so your upper mid-range into the treble, takes a little bit of the energy out of the driver. For me, it robs a little bit of the life and energy out of the driver as well. But when I was playing around with it, and I'll talk about this a lot more in my review when that goes live, when I was playing around with it, it really depended on which pads I had on as to whether I liked or didn't like the Mantle. It was very much a mix and match sort of situation. But it does look to be quite heavily damping of the airflow coming off the front of the driver. Was that the intent? What went into the thinking behind it?
The Mantle mesh, yeah. I mean, basically the thinking was, so we use a lot of pure silver in the coating and on the traces of the driver. And, that obviously silver is the best conductor, or one of the best conductors. So it just has a lot of treble extension, the Caldera, despite its, ZMF, whatever, slightly liquid tuning to it. It does have that kind of sheen to the high end. And some people love it, and some it's just a little too much for. And it came from, I would say, probably somewhere between 2 and 5% of people find that high treble just a touch too much. Yep. And it wasn't something I planned on releasing, but as with anything, what we do, we cater to our audience. And I realized that, for those people who are a little sensitive in that, and have really good hearing in the 10 to 15 kilohertz area, after doing some measurements and doing it, I was like, this is going to make those people happy. And that's the goal, to have an option so that anyone who spends money on the headphones and, puts their trust in us to make a good headphone for them, that we can find, and honestly, those people who have found them too bright really like the Mantle mesh. Yeah. Whereas I, like me and you, I think we both discussed, I prefer it without it. And I think you do too.
I do. Yeah. I think for me, with the stock pads, which are just the middle thickness Caldera pads, I think I can see an argument for the Mantle. Like I could go either way depending on the source and the music I was listening to at the time. Yeah. My preference on pads is the thicker pads. I like the extra depth in Soundstage that it produces, and it also tames a little bit of that sense of energy. So for me, it's the thick pads with no Mantle. But as I said before, with the thin or with the regular pads, the Mantle sort of, in a way, almost comes and goes for me as to which one I'd want it to be. So yeah, I can totally understand some people not wanting it without the Mantle. But for me, I prefer it without Mantle, and with the thick pads is my preference, definitely.
What's your go-to amps these days, Lachlan? You go inside.
It's an interesting question too, because the Caldera in particular, whilst I wouldn't describe it as amp dependent, it certainly, I find, is improved by certain amps and also certain cables I've tried it with too. So I really love it with a pure silver cable, and I'm not normally someone that's into pure silver, but something about the combination of the pure silver with the Caldera, and then the amp I'm often using it with that combination, is the Enlium Amp 23R that I've just been reviewing.
I've heard that one.
Crazy. Nice. Have you actually heard it in person? Like, you've tried it or not?
No, okay. I just heard it. I heard that it is nice. I hear.
Okay. Yeah. No, it's it's not a thick sounding amp. It's got body and richness to it, but it's not overly thick. I think some people have talked about it as being overly thick, but I don't tend to agree. But it's definitely got a richness to it. It's got a sense of body and presence to it, which I really like.
Not thick like a Vioelectric or a...
No, that's it. Yeah, I don't find it that way anyway. So for me, I've got sort of here on my desk at the moment, I've got the Soloist GT, which is a bit leaner sounding, or a bit, not leaner, but a bit drier sounding than the Enlium. I've got the Phonitor XE, and to me, probably the Phonitor XE and the Enlium have a similar-ish sound, but the Phonitor XE is a little bit cleaner overall. It doesn't do space quite as well. And what I love in particular about the Enlium is its sense of energy and clarity and almost attack, and not attack in an aggressive way so much as the leading edges of notes. You've got this real sense of kind of energy and tactility to them. And the combination of that with the Caldera, and actually this ends up being a nice segue, one of the things I love about the Caldera is its sense of that tactility, that articulation, that attack on the leading edges of notes. You can actually feel the movement of the air almost on those leading edges, and that's something that it pairs beautifully with the Enlium. Because of that, sort of the two work together well. And I was going to ask you, when I read through the website, there was talk on the website about the fact that the specific thickness of the diaphragm, you tried to find a balance between speed but also kind of note weight, was my understanding. Is that right? And without giving away trade secrets, what was it that you looked at doing to give it that sound ultimately?
Yeah, I mean, you look at all the thicknesses of diaphragms out there, and there's definitely a race to the thinnest, at some point. I mean, I always remember that video of Fang Bian dropping I think it was the HE1000 diaphragm, or maybe Susvara, and it's like floating like a butterfly down, and you're like, it could not be a thinner driver. And so after listening to all those headphones, and I think I opened it, I bought a bunch of them when designing our Planar, I realized there is like an inflection point where you go from like physicality, like what the LCD4 did to, LCD5 / Susvara type etherealism, and that, with the whole goal being not to copy something that was out there, do something that was like what anyone else was doing, finding the right thickness, the right coatings for the driver, the right impedance, and then the magnet design. It was all focused on trying to make something sound like a dynamic driver, basically,
Right.
that you've got that attack when someone an instrument that's supposed to have attack, like a snare drum or something like that, hits, that you actually feel it a little bit. Whereas, I think what I found, at least in our experiments, was like there's a point where the driver gets so thin that it's moving the air, but you don't feel it as much. And I don't know, I just enjoy that physicality of air moving so much that I wanted to make sure we had that in the headphones. So
Yep.
a lot of my design decisions went towards that. And that's honestly what the Atrium damping system is kind of designed to, is to make sure that, the air, you're keeping a lot of air going towards the ear versus just exiting through the headphone.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense, because it definitely comes across as what you hear when you listen to the Caldera. It's got one of the things I've been describing it, because I've been chatting a lot to patrons. I've had a few patrons that are kind of thinking, do we buy, don't we buy? And they've been saying, how does it compare to this? How does it compare to that? And one of the things that stood out to me when I've tried to describe it is for me, the Caldera sits somewhere between like a Susvara, in terms of it's got that level of energy to it that a Susvara has, but it's got the weight and the body to it, which is where the Susvara falls short for me. Like, the Susvara to me is almost the technical pinnacle of the speed and resolution of a headphone, but I ultimately ended up moving mine on because it didn't capture me emotionally, because it lacked the weight. And that's not a knock on the Susvara for those out there that love it. That I totally get why people love it. But then
you can't out Susvara,
What's that?
Oh, I said you can't out Susvara.
Exactly.
It does the things it does so well that it's,
That's it.
I was like, it's not worth trying to do that better than Susvara, because it does that stuff, that ethereal electrostatic planar sound in a way that,
it's hard to match.
I think you can outdo that. Yeah. And I wanted a little bit of it, but yeah.
And I feel like you got it in the sense of, I will never forget my first time listening to the Susvaras when I got my pair. I don't know what the track was. I wish I'd written it down to go back and test every headphone against that benchmark. There was a track I listened to, and it had an acoustic guitar being played in it. And the first pluck of a guitar string, the energy of that pluck that you could feel through the Susvara was just magic. And that, I get a little bit of that, maybe not quite to the same degree, but a little bit of that from the Caldera, where you get that sense of energy. One of the tracks I listened to when I was reviewing the Enlium was was it the Enlium review? Hang on, I've got my Caldera notes in front of me. I'll soon find out if it was actually the Caldera review. No, it was the Enlium review. I can't talk today. And it was a version of Billie Eilish's Bad Guy. And at the beginning, there's some vocals in each channel, left and right channels. And you can literally feel the breath so the way the microphone's captured the breath and then the driver's pushing it back out, you can actually almost feel like the singer is next to your ears, speaking in your ears, and you can feel those little kind of puffs of breath. And the Caldera does that, and I love that. But then on the flip side, what I also love about it is it's got that body and that weight. So the headphones that I've been using as kind of my reference flagship have been the Meze Audio Elites, and before that the Empyreans. And for me, I think the Caldera strikes in many ways a balance between the Susvara and something like maybe the Empyreans, where you've got some technicalities like the Susvara, not to that degree, but along the way, you've got the energy of the Susvara, but then you've got a bit of that body and that weight. It's not as bombastic as the Empyrean, but it's got the body, it's got the presence and the rhythm to it. But one thing I was really interested to ask you about, something that I've noticed the Mezes do is they suck out some of the upper mid-range. So around that 3 kilohertz-ish mark, there's a suck out on the Mezes, and it helps produce this sense of depth in the soundstage. And lately I've tried a few headphones. The DCA Expanse was one, and now the Caldera, where you don't have that suck out. So tonally, it's probably actually more accurate, and it sounds more natural when I listen to it, but you lose a little bit of that sense of depth in the soundstage from a headphone as a result. I was curious to know where your decision-making balance points were as you tuned it. Was it something that you specifically went for tonal accuracy? You just went for what sounded good to your ears? How did you arrive at the Caldera sound?
Yeah, I mean, I will openly admit that, and I tell people I use the Verite all the time, a Verite Open. But I'll openly admit I have, some PTSD over Clinical saying that it sounded wonky, and then seeing the word wonky written all over the internet for 2 years and trying to figure out what exactly that meant and where it came from. And, after talking to a lot of our people, it was basically, that it has, a laid back 3 kilohertz to 5 kilohertz area. And while I personally don't find that wonky per se, it basically led to people stop buying the Verite because it had that laid back mid range area, and that's kind of what makes the Verite so special and gives it that kind of deep, and wide sound like a Meze Elite or something like that. But I realized that having that area a little more filled in would add a little more to the attack and tonal accuracy of the mid range. And that, I could do that, have that more laid back area with a pad change and have it as a secondary pad rather than having it as the stock tuning. And so my goal was to kind of provide that in a way, but kind of not have it be so frontal that it might be, that the stock version of the Caldera was more tonally accurate, as you said. But still have a pad where you could get that laid back 3-dimensional chill sound that you could listen to for a long time and have that slightly more depth. I don't think, in any form the deep pads go to that extent that the Verite Open does with the Universe pads. But, it goes in that direction.
I'm jumping in here because I'm halfway through editing the podcast from this morning, and we already knew this problem was here, but I've now found a way to hopefully get around it and not have to re-record the podcast. And that's because when I started up my Room EQ Wizard software to take a look at some of the measurements that we were talking about with Zach, it actually crashed my recording in my end of the software, the platform that I use. So what I've got now is I've got a whole lot of footage and audio of Zach without my questions leading to it. So what I'm going to do here is just jump in every now and again and share with you what I'd asked Zach in an approximate way, and then go back over to Zach's response to me. So this first one, we'd been talking about the Caldera and its tuning. I'd mentioned the fact that with something like the Meze Elites, what I've noticed is that the Meze Elites produce a greater sense of depth, but they don't have quite the same degree of kind of naturality and body and weight through the mid-range. So I was talking about that with Zach, and then this was his response.
Yeah, the Elite kind of specializes in that like infinite depth thing. That's kind of like what the Elite does. Yeah, and I tell people all the time, the of all the planars I tried to thus far, an Elite were the two I use most. And the Elites, I just think that thing's fantastic. It's definitely the favorite of the ones that I tried, which was a lot of them. It's just I think it's a very special headphone.
So here we transitioned over to talking about the Atrium closed, and I started things off by asking Zach a bit about the design of the cups themselves, because one of the things that stood out to me when I got the Atrium closed was it's got a more sculpted shaped cup. It's not just a hemisphere like many of the previous headphones have been, say the Icon, the Verite closed, etc. It's a bit more sculpted, and I immediately liked the design a bit better as a result. And so what I was asking Zach was whether or not the aesthetics played into the design and the shape of those cups, or if it was purely due to the sonics of the design.
A little of each. I mean, I with the Atrium damping system, where the driver ends up being pointed, we have to be very careful with how the interior and volume of the cup is shaped. And so there were some requirements with that, and what I ended up finding, the driver distance from the ear and how far the damping material needed to be in the cup from the back of the cup. So there were a couple things there, but then aesthetically the goal was, I wanted to make sure that it didn't look like a Verite closed, which the funny thing is now when I see 2-dimensional pictures of it, I'm like, damn, that kind of looks like a Verite closed. But then I think when you pick it up, though, you can tell pretty quickly that especially this back angle when your thumb kind of hits on this. It's a totally different feel. It's kind of sharp there, and it just, it has a kind of lighter, more ambient, aesthetic to it than the Verite closed. I think in contrast, not that it's a bad thing, but it feels a little bigger, a little heftier. Even though they're similar size, it's all comes down to that kind of aesthetic design. So yeah, I mean, there's always a dance between the aesthetics and the sonics and making sure everything works. But I'm glad you like the design of it. It's, I'm always I think that's true. It's like you want the wood to be the highlight of everything so that the grain can stand out, but at the same time you want it to be a shape that feels good in the hand and kind of has that angular look that plays with your other senses.
I've had some discussions with some of my channel patrons about the fact that the closed designs from ZMF or ZMF are very basic, they're very plain. It's more about letting the wood grain be the hero of the design, but that's in quite a bit of contrast to the beautiful looking cups and the grills on things like the Caldera, the Atrium, etc. So what I was asking Zach here was if there was any possibility in the future that they might look into, say, laser engraving or embossing or even burning the various designs of, say, the grill design type thing into the actual wooden cups, or if they just want to keep them plain.
Yeah, we actually had talked about it before, but my argument to our team and to Eddie, I was always like, we could do that, but then it kind of creates this thing where you're going to have two designs, one with the wood there and one with the grill, and then you have more options for the closed model, or two, you're cutting out all this beautiful wood by default that you might be able to showcase, at other, say, like if you were doing resin or like very figured, olive wood like we have here. So, that's one of in a perfect world, yeah, we would have all the options you could. And I don't know, we're trying to do the custom shop coming up in the next year or two. Who knows? Maybe that will be one of the options. I know for a fact, and we have done this as for the custom shop thoughts, is that, doing little laser etchings on the back of the wood and in little kind of under the gimbal type places, down there type of thing. And so, I mean, yeah, I guess there's a possibility you could laser etch all over the wood, whatever you want. People could send us in. Zeos could send me in, naked anime girls that I could throw them on the cup for him and, put them right all over the fancy wood, just anime babes.
I was curious to know about Zach's choices around tuning of the Atrium closed. It's a different sound from the Atrium open. It's also different from the Verite closed. I talked about the fact that they both share a little bit of sense of kind of energy and dynamics, that being the Atrium closed and the Verite closed. But I was really interested to hear where Zach had gotten his inspiration, where his kind of direction, his target, if you like, was for the sound of the Atrium closed.
So I kind of think of it as a continuation of the Icon in a way. And mostly that it has a more of a sub-bass accentuation and slight downslope tuning pattern, which is the kind of interesting, just that it is kind of different than the Atrium Open in that sense, where the Atrium Open has that more slightly romantic HD 650 kind of sloping to it, whereas this is a little more laid back in the upper mids. It has that sub-bass accentuation where the sub-bass peaks at 50 hertz. And the Icon kind of just, the way it was tuned, it was just kind of a straight down slope. And so this is a little different than that, but I kind of think of it in the way, being a biocellulose driver, the high impedance driver, kind of as like the Icon with all the things I've learned in the last 7 years since, I designed the Icon, with the Icon coming out in 2016. So, yeah, I mean, as far as my goals, I guess, which was the question you asked, I wanted to make sure that I had a headphone in our stable that had that, sub bass rumble, because I actually tune out the sub bass in a lot of our models because I feel like it can get in the way. Like if the Verite closed or the Atticus had more sub bass, they wouldn't work because, you can only have so much mid bass and sub bass at the same time. If you have them both in there, then they kind of just get in the way of everything else, especially if it's accentuated at all, like in most closed headphones. And so, the trick was to get the sub bass a little bit higher than the mid bass so that you still could have a clean sound that was enjoyable with that rumble without it kind of getting in the way of everything else.
The Atrium closed are the first closed-back headphone from ZMF that I've seen, at least, that's not using a fully perforated pad. The pads on it look different to what I was used to seeing, so I was confirming with Zach exactly which pads were actually on the Atrium closed, and also what the thinking was around which pads had been chosen and which ones might work.
So it's the same Caldera pads. They're the slim Caldera pads. So the same pad that comes on the Caldera with the solid interior and then the perforated top and outside. And I know people will say, hey, I thought you said before that the Atrium, that all closed headphones should have, totally solid pads. And I still stand by that. But I stand by that the interior of the pads is the real area that has to be closed for it to be a true closed headphone, because that's the part that mates against the ear. And the reason for the perforations is that I found to get that true sub-bass response and not have it overwhelm or anything, you have to have a really gradual dissipation of energy. And so like in the Verite closed, I can actually just show you here for the people who are watching, on the Verite closed, there's 5 ports on the baffle here. 1, 2, 3, 4. You can kind of see them alongside the grill there on the outside. Whereas in the Atrium closed, there's just one 16th inch hole. And let's see if I might be able to see it better here. That's just under, there you go. Just under the screw head here. And that's the only port in it. And so, by design, the Atrium closed is actually a more closed headphone than the Verite closed. But to get that, to get the driver to work in concert in the best, most efficient way itself, doing the perforations actually helped me dissipate the energy in a more gradual fashion to where, if I just had the ports on the baffle or just had the perforations on the pads, the energy would dissipate in a way that was very unpleasant. And so it's kind of just, having that gradual decay without doing it all in one spot, which, I think is more natural to the way we hear sound in a physical environment as well.
This inevitably led me to thinking about using the Caldera pads on some other closed-back ZMF headphones, so I asked Zach how they'd gone, if he tried them on those, if other people had tried them on those, to see what he had to say. And by the way, thanks so much for bearing with me during this technical glitch. We're going to be back to the normal podcast in just a moment. There's probably a couple more inserts from me, and then we're back to a normal conversation. So now back over to Zach, talking about how well the Caldera pads might work on other ZMF headphones.
Oh, there's a couple people I know that have tried the Caldera pads on the Verite close and say they like it. I mean, which is great. I think if you like that, then, that's the whole thing about audio. You like what you like, you should do it, and you shouldn't let anyone tell you what you shouldn't like. But as far, I have put them on and measured them and everything, and they don't measure or sound quite how I want them to. I think, for me, I have to be happy with it as the designer of these silly headphones. I'm like, it doesn't meet the intent that I had for it because I didn't tune it to that, that exact place. So, but that's not to say it doesn't work. You can definitely use them on closed headphones, whether they're ZMF or any other brand, to try them and see if you like them. And I have tried all solid Caldera pads, and because of the that subtle fluting, where the inside of the pad towards the driver is, a smaller cavity than the outside here because it's sloped. The all solid pads hold in just far too much energy into the driver and make it so bassy. It's almost like putting solid pads on an open headphone. It just like boosts the bass by 5-10 more dB, and for some people it might be a joy. Yeah, I mean, headphones are they're so fragile, because it's such a small area around your ear. You think about the tiny hairs in your ear and your eardrum. I mean, it's just all such such little oscillations make things change. So, it's always a fun and frustrating and journey finding these little tiny changes that make things work. Yeah. So what are your thoughts? Atrium closed, Atrium open. What Where do you find yourself these? Not which one do you prefer, but I don't, or maybe whatever. What do you think?
My answer here was that I'm very much in two minds still. I think I might be one of those people that's just not a huge fan of closed backs. I find every closed back I've tried either tends towards having too much energy and I eventually get a bit fatigued by it, or I find it's a little bit too kind of boxy and muffled and actually lacking in energy. So I'm a bit of a funny one there. The other thing I said to Zach was that he told me that they need some extra burn in to really kind of settle down, and so I've been just letting them run a bit, using them from time to time, but I haven't spent a lot of detailed time with them yet. My early thoughts are that I think I like them more than the Verite Close. I don't have the Verite Close here to compare, but I also find that there's still a headphone that I don't always kind of want to listen to for extended periods, and that's where I come back to the fact that it might just be me and sort of the whole closed back thing for me. I don't own any closed backs other than those that I've deliberately kept around as kind of a reference point for other reviews. And so where I was going with this was that for me, the Atrium is one of my all-time favourite headphones. So it's a tough hill to climb for the Atrium Close to match up to that. And indeed, it's a different headphone as well. I don't think it's intended to. It's tuned a bit differently. So it's early days. I still need to do my critical listening. I need to spend more time with the Atrium Closed. I think it's my favourite closed back that I've tried so far, but it's also coming with the caveat that I may not be a closed back listener. I may not always enjoy that. So the review is coming sort of in the near future. And I wouldn't say soon. It's not quite that soon in the pipeline, but it is absolutely coming. I'm starting to form thoughts on it, starting to chat to patrons about it from time to time. And it's definitely a lovely, wonderful headphone. It's just going to come down to personal taste as to who enjoys it more or less. And as I said, I don't know yet if I'm actually a closed back listener. That's going to remain to be seen when I find the right closed back headphone for me.
It's funny. There's like those, maybe you have some on your Patreon too, the people who are like, I only buy closed headphones, or there's like the closed headphone bros who, and I have been one for a long time just because a lot of times when I want to put headphones on, I don't want to deal with any sounds, especially if I'm in a workshop and, someone might be yelling my name, like now's the time I get to not hear anyone yell my name or say anything. But I get what you mean about the energy, and because that's kind of the whole thing with closed backs is there's nowhere for that energy to go but into your ears, and which I know people who are sensitive to that. It definitely, closed headphones can be tough for some people.
All right, so I'm just coming back in now. We've had a technical glitch that we've just discovered that it seems when you open Room EQ Wizard, which is the software I use to do my measurements, it kills certain functions within the browser, screen capture something. Apologies for the technical glitch for everyone listening. But I think from here, let's look now at the Auteur Classic, because I'm really fascinated with these. I liked the original Auteur a great deal. I liked its sort of tonality that it brought and the weight of notes from the biocellulose driver. I'm really impressed with the Auteur Classic, and I'm impressed with it for different reasons, and I'm really interested to know from you if this was deliberate, if this was just a byproduct of the Atrium damping when attached to the redesigned Auteur Classic driver. These for me sound and measure very neutral, very kind of almost studio monitor sound. Was that deliberate? Is that how you perceive them? Am I missing something there? What are your thoughts?
Yeah, I kind of think of the ZMF lineup as breaking into two camps. You have kind of the Atrium Auteur camp, and you have the Verite camp, and then the Caldera is, its own planar thing, or Verite A-list camp. And it's just kind of the more, colored and, slightly off neutral tunings, and then what I call ZMF neutral for the Atrium and Auteur. And so the goal with the Auteur is always to have a headphone in our lineup that is, even though I think neutrality is a social construct, so to speak, because it's, there's no truth of like where neutral actually measures, but it's what I consider my neutral when I'm tuning the Auteur sound. And granted, that still means, a tiny bit of bass accentuation, a little bit of extra nuance to the staging and whatnot. But that's kind of what I think of it as. So.
And has the Auteur Classic been received well? I don't tend to get time to get onto Headfire and stuff like that to sort of read the comments. How's it being received?
I mean, to be honest, I almost feel like it. And part of it's my fault, just that I kind of was just like, oh, here's the Auteur Classic. Like I didn't do a lot of work around the release of it. Mm-hmm. You know, so I think it's the people who have it love it, and it's definitely a little different than the original Auteur, but with a lot of the original Auteur flavoring in there. I mean, you know, when people ask what's the difference, I mainly say, you know, it's a little smoother in the mid to upper mids. It's got a little more texture and like the bass is a little tighter. And the soundstage is a little deeper and wider than the original version. But overall, it was meant to be, you know, and the story is that we ran out of drivers. And that's, you know, of the original Auteur icon driver, you know, I think I bought 3,000 of them or something. And we moved on after that, you know, and I worked with another driver manufacturer to make our custom driver design. And basically, you know, I wanted to keep enough drivers in to have that lifetime warranty keep going for the original Auteur. So I was like, you know, there's things I think I can improve on in the Auteur. I want to keep making it, but you know, I'm not the kind of person who wants to come out with Auteur 1.1. I'd rather just say, hey, this is it's the same headphone, but it's a new driver, has our Atrium damping system in it. There's enough changes to constitute a new model. And so, yeah, but when people come and ask, hey, should I upgrade my Auteur OG or not? I'm always like, you know, maybe get your ears on it first, just because if you love your original Auteur, you know, this is similar. I think you'll like this too, but it may different. Not be different. It may not be like an upgrade plan. It's more of like just a kind of slightly different.
Yeah, no, I definitely agree with that. And where I've been loving them, as I sort of alluded to before, is for me, they're actually, if someone's out there looking for a mixing, mastering type headphone, I find them great for that because, like you said, you've smoothed out a little bit of the lumpiness, and I don't mean that in a bad way, but the frequency response had a bit more coloration in the original Auteur, whereas I feel like these strike a more kind of linear overall sound throughout the frequency range, which for me, if I'm editing a video or you know, putting together a piece where I'm sort of wanting to mix together some dialogue and some music, then I find them really helpful at understanding what's actually going to come out of the speakers or a different headphone later on. So yeah, from that point of view, and it's kind of maybe ironic, is that the word, or appropriate that they're called the Auteur, because in some ways I can see them as being a creator's tool, very much so. I enjoy them very much for that.
Yeah, I mean, whenever someone says, hey, what, I've never heard of a ZMF before, which one should I get? Or they say mixing, video work, professional, any kind of that, just studio, I'm just like, Auteur, just do that one. Because, you know, the other ones are more geared towards like an audiophile, you know, sound that has more nuance and extravagance to it that may not always be appreciated as much in those areas. So. Yeah.
Definitely. Like for me, I never ever reach for the Atriums if I'm editing videos. It's not a headphone I want for that. I will absolutely listen to it for music, but it's always straight to the Auteur if I'm looking for a headphone. I mean, I say straight to the Auteur. I've got so many here that I mix and match. Sometimes it's the HD 660 S2, sometimes it's the Auteur Classic, but it's right in that mix since you send it over where I'll reach for it regularly. And I find them, I don't know exactly what's changed. I'm guessing it's the headbands with I can't remember, is it the crescent headband? Is that what you call it? With the
with it's got the
little extra padding bits,
the little patty bits.
Yeah,
little niblets of padding.
Niblets, I like it. I find the comfort of the current models to be exceptional. The older ones, like my Verite Opens, were a little bit, I think you actually put the new headband on them when you refurbished them for me, but prior to that I didn't always feel like they were as solid on my head as I'd like.
We send you the BBB straps?
No, I don't think so. What are they for?
So it's just a newer strap that is on some of the more like fancy wood versions that we've made in small amounts.
It's being used on my one. That's what's on my Atriums, I think.
Yes.
Yep.
You've got one on the Atriums there. Yep. Yeah. So yeah, we have them on the website for a la carte sale, but they're just a lot more surface area to them and much thicker leather. Yeah.
And definitely, I mean, the Atriums are wonderfully comfortable for that reason as well. The ones that you sent me with that pad. But having said that, I've worn the Auto Classic for an entire day, basically doing video calls, doing editing, all sorts of stuff, and they're wonderful. So there's been an upgrade there for me as well. I think with the Crescent pad, I don't know if it's anything else that's changed or it's just the Crescent pad, because they're using normal pads. Yeah, so it's
got the Auteur pads on them.
Yep.
Yeah. So it's stayed with the same stock pad.
Yep.
Yeah.
And that's working a treat. I'm conscious of time here because I do have a pretty hard stop today. Let's quickly circle back because I think with the glitch we've missed some conversation we had.
Oh yeah, if you want to redo that another time too, I can come back on or another day or whatever.
Actually, yeah, maybe week. If you're happy to do that, let me maybe go and look at I'll go and look at the footage and see what's happened. See if I can stitch it back together. Because even if your responses are clear, then I can even just jump in and say, "This is what I asked Zach. Let's hear his answer," and that'll work. And if not, if you're okay to sort of come back around and just read.
Next Tuesdays are good. So
cool. Maybe next week we do it if we need to. Yeah. All right, perfect. That sounds great.
Yeah, and I can wear the same shirt and everything for YouTube.
That's right. I'll be transparent with the fact that there was a glitch and an error, so that's all good. So I think in that case then, Zach, let's wrap it up there. So thanks as always for your time. For those watching, listening to this, the reviews of the Caldera is coming first and foremost, and that's going to be sort of not exactly rapidly because I've got a pretty stacked schedule at the moment, but it will be followed by the Atrium Closed and the Auto Classic. But just to give everyone a teaser of what's to follow, I think all three are brilliant headphones. As I said at the opening of this, I think something about the inclusion of the Atrium damping system has taken everything you were doing and just really ramped it up to another level. So I'm loving what you're putting out, and I can't wait to hear the new portable. What's the portable going to be called, by the way?
I don't know, actually. Okay. We're actually at the stage where we're starting to make the chassis, and we need to come up with a name and a logo for it. So, I'm sure, if you post this as a video or somewhere with comments, don't email me, but leave a comment on this video, and we'll figure it out.
Sounds good. All right, Zach. Well, thanks again for your time. Always great to chat, and we will look forward to seeing the new mobile model, whatever that's called, the portable model coming out soon.
Yeah, thanks, Lachlan. I'll check you soon.
Sounds great. Thanks, Zach.